Ghost of Yotei keeps lingering in my head. Cause for all of my issues with it, Yotei keeps doing these small, weird, specific things that truly make it stand out. You ride into some rough little tavern in the middle of nowhere and the whole place has this tension in the air. You get pulled off your path by one tiny event and suddenly you're 6 detours deep doing something you never planned to do. You pull weeds around a hot spring for no real reason, hear a little jingle, and then watch a bear cub find the courage to slide down a hill to its mother. And then 5 minutes later, the game lets you turn into an actual nightmare. Ghost dance kicks in, the screen goes black and white, enemies start backing away from you like they've just realized they're about to die. And that is exactly the side of Yotei I want to discuss here. Not whether it's enough of a sequel, not what it still needs to fix, but all the things Yotei does so unbelievably well that they must preserve in the next Ghost game. One of Yotei's best strengths is that it almost always knows how to tempt you. Cause plenty of open world games are full of content, but very few are actually good at making you want to go off course. And Yotei is one of the exceptions. You head toward a merchant you're tasked with confronting, then suddenly a prisoner needs saving. Then after dealing with that, you look up and spot the merchant you were trying to reach. So you get back on your horse, you start riding toward him, but before you can get there, some guy is panicking because a bear is chasing his horse. Then you calm that situation down, turn around, and notice those little statues hinting that an altar of reflection is nearby. So of course you're now climbing some steep cliff. You pray at the altar and finally you're ready to head back to the merchant. But on the way back down, some weird rock formation catches your eye and suddenly you're painting Sumi instead. And now the thing you originally meant to do feels like it happened 3 lives ago. And that flow is so unbelievably good, cause it never feels like the game is waving its arms around screaming for your attention. It just quietly keeps putting interesting things in your path until you naturally cave. And that's a huge part of why Yotei is so easy to sink into. It understands that getting pulled sideways is one of the best feelings an open world game can create. And that's what keeps happening in Yotei. Like I was riding out to find some missing supplies for a merchant, but then I heard growling off to the side and spotted 4 rogue dogs standing over a couple of bodies in a pool of blood. So I took care of the dogs and was about to get back on the road when the camera suddenly pushed toward the blood trail. And suddenly the game was yet again nudging me towards something else so subtly that I completely forgot that I was supposed to help the merchant. So I followed the trail, pulled out the spyglass and realized the camp ahead was full of more guard dogs. A hint showed up on screen telling me that they would be able to sniff me out if I got too close, and now the whole situation had shifted. So what started as me just reacting to some random growling on the road turned into this really cool bounty hunter mission where I had to fire arrows from horseback to take out the dozens of guard dogs before taking on the boss. And that's just such a great example of how Yotei makes discovery feel earned. The game is so good at using the environment to bait you. You spot smoke out in the distance, you notice a weirdly vibrant tree, or something about the terrain just looks slightly off. And your brain instantly tells you that there's clearly something interesting to find in that direction. And that's such a powerful design strength. Because instead of just feeding you tasks, it's making your curiosity do the work. And I really don't think enough open world games understand how valuable that is. Even the small notes nailed to the post fits that same philosophy. You come across a tavern and you see that little note nailed to a post. You only get a clue, a rough direction and a vague description, and then it's completely up to you to find the place. You've got no map marker and no wind to guide you, and that really makes the activity feel worthwhile, cause sometimes the best way to pull the player forward is simply to explain less. It suddenly feels like you're actually exploring and not just mindlessly following the direction the game gives you. But I also think the puzzles deserve more credit than they get, not because they're difficult or especially complex, but because Fox puzzles really make sense from a narrative perspective. The Ninetales are devious, they're known for working in the shadows, so it really does make sense for them to secure their hideouts with puzzles and traps. And it's honestly also a really nice change of pace, because suddenly Atsu is not just fighting her way through the world, she has to slow down, read and interpret clues to try and understand the logic of the places she's in. That's also why I like the Fox puzzles more before you got the chart that tells you exactly what the symbols mean, because before that you were actually looking at the layout and trying to feel the pattern out for yourself. So the fox in the middle should probably point straight ahead and the ones around it should probably mirror each other. Like there was clearly some kind of logic to it. And completing puzzles that way felt infinitely better than just reading a chart and matching the symbols. But it is important to note that there are a few places where they get the fox puzzles just right. At the Snow Blight Shrine, you have to turn the fox statues to match the foxes carved into the rock face above. And afterwards you have to light the stone lanterns that match the hanging lanterns above them. And that's exactly what they should have done with all of the puzzles. But overall, I think they've done a better job with reliquary puzzles, cause here you always get a clue in the form of a poem you have to decipher. The mountain raised the boy as her own. Demons looked away from them in fear, but the wolf watched them both, ready to provide aid. And I'm not saying this is some insanely difficult puzzle, but you still have to stop for a second and process what you just read. And then you go from statue to statue, turning the demons away from the center and the wolf toward it. And having to do that just makes the experience more rewarding, because the game stops holding your hand and actually trusts you to use your brain. But I will say the poem you get at the Reliquary of Resilience is too vague. Just take a listen. Within the caverns of Mount Yotei, a lost boy surrendered to a tired sleep. The wolf stood guard, looking toward the mountain. So naturally you think you should point the wolves toward Mount Yotei. Wrong! Okay, weird. Then maybe you need to point them to one of the 3 other mountains you see on the horizon. Wrong! Instead you have to point them inwards. Like bro, how does that even make sense?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg.
But thankfully all the other reliquary puzzles made perfect sense. And when you add up all we've just talked about, I believe Yotei teaches us one important lesson. Curiosity is way more powerful than instruction. And the next game absolutely needs to keep leaning into that. Not just in puzzles, but in the world itself. Because some of Yotei's best moments happen when the game doesn't tell you that something's important. It just places something strange or inviting in front of you and trusts you to care. And that's exactly why I love randomly coming across these small taverns tucked away in the wilderness. Because the atmosphere here just hits you immediately. You walk in and there's just instantly this tension in the air. Ronin are staring you down. The innkeeper is basically telling you they're not looking for trouble. People are sitting around drinking and playing Senihachiki. And for a second it feels like you've stepped into the kind of place where anything could happen. And that's such a strong foundation that they need to build on top of in the next game. Because you can already feel the cooler version of Ghost hiding inside these spaces. The version where Ronin actually challenge you to duels, where the innkeeper asks for help kicking some loud drunk into the mud, where Atsu can sit down, buy a cup of sake, talk to travelers, ask about the Yotei 6, and just absorb stories from the people on the road while shamisen players perform in the background. The taverns hint at a version of the series that feels more social, more lived in, and more dangerous. And this idea is really well showcased in the Oni's Breath In mission. You have people warning you about Oni raiders occupying the place. You have a merchant outside selling you a mysterious demon mask you need to wear to get in. You have drunk guests challenging Atsu to a fist fight. You hear murmurs from Ronin and local farmers about the Oni raiders' presence. And once you step inside the inn, you have raiders drinking and socializing. Then you end up playing a drinking game with one of the Oni raiders where you ask Atsu riddles, and depending on whether she answers right or wrong, either he or she has to take a sip of sake. And to top it all off, the whole thing erupts into that classic, "Alright pal, let's take this outside" moment.
Fine, we take it outside. I hate spilling good sake.
And that's exactly what taverns should feel like outside of missions. Like you're dropped into a place that actually feels alive with its own rhythm and rules. Cause most of that atmosphere and unpredictability fades once the mission ends. You lose the party, you lose the people drinking and getting into fights. You lose the sense that this place is still simmering after you leave. And that's exactly why I say it feels like a glimpse of something even better. Cause it shows just how good the next game could be if Sucker Punch pushed these social spaces just one step further. But another thing that really stands out is how the merchants are not stationary but actually wander the world. You can find them in various towns, ride past them on the road, find them chilling in the most random places out in the wild, and encounter them when you're setting up camp. And it really does something special for the feel of the world. Because when you're riding through the middle of nowhere and suddenly run into some familiar merchant just chilling out there, it makes the whole world feel less staged. It feels like commerce is actually happening. Like people are moving through Esso for their own reasons instead of standing still and waiting for the player to reach the designated shop marker. And it's a small thing on paper, but it goes a long way. It helps the world feel inhabited, and that kind of social texture is really worth holding on to. And I also really like when those wandering characters or side encounters evolve into something more than just a one-off interaction. Like randomly coming across Taro while you think he's just doing his usual traveling merchant thing, only for it to turn out that he's actually trying to lead a group of villagers to safety. That kind of moment does so much for the world, because suddenly what started as you moving toward one objective turns into this unexpected little escort mission. And again, it makes the world feel like things are happening in it whether or not you plan for them. And the other thing Yotei deserves way more credit for is when side content actually follows through after you think it's over. Matchlock Murata is a great example. You find him shot in his house, you patch him up, and he tells you he's been shot by one of Saito's men when he had doubts about selling the pistol. So you track the bastard down and find him as he's killing off an entire family with the exact pistol Murata made for him. So obviously you kill him off and force Murata to actually confront the consequences of selling weapons without caring who they end up with. Murata apologizes and promises he'll stop selling weapons to evil people. And that should be it. You've completed the mission, you've received the pistol as a reward, but then later when you come back to upgrade your pistol, the game actually chooses to follow up on it. A group of raiders has come by Murata's house asking for more weapons, but instead of caving, you see him actually deliver on his promise to Atsu and refuse to sell to the raiders. And that's such a great detail, cause Sucker Punch didn't have to include it, but it just adds to the immersion of the world, cause suddenly his promise to Atsu wasn't just empty words for the sake of quickly ending a quest. You actually get to see the consequences play out. And it's the exact same thing with Genji the Armorer. I just randomly rode past him on the road, and out of nowhere I'm being pulled into a mission. A new armor set he made had been stolen by Saito's men, so now Atsu and him had to come up with a plan. Genji would let himself get captured to find out where they had stashed the armor, and then Atsu would take out all the guards and free him afterwards. And the great thing is that after completing the mission, you're not only rewarded with the new armor, but you also get to test it in combat against a new wave of enemies who's waiting for Atsu outside. That kind of follow through matters so much, cause it makes side content feel like part of the world instead of something the game forgets the second the reward pops up. And even tiny stuff like Hannah's farm steadily improving after you help her matters for the same reason. Cause the game really didn't need to show it. It could have frozen the world in place like so many other games do. But instead it gives you that little sign that your actions carried weight, that they actually had impact on your surroundings. And when open world games do that, even in tiny ways, the whole thing starts feeling way more organic. And that's also exactly why we can't forget about all the small details in the game. Cause some of Yotei's best moments are the tiny ones it absolutely didn't need to include. And I think that's a huge part of why it still lingers in my head. Like something as simple as putting weeds around a hot spring, that's such a tiny interaction. You do it, a little jingle plays, and that's basically it. But you don't do it because you're rewarded for it, you're doing it because it feels zen. It just feels right to clean up the hot spring before soaking in it. And then right after you get some small natural moment like a bear cub finally finding the courage to slide down a gravel slope and reunite with its mother. And again, you don't get any cutscene or reward, it just happens. And that stuff matters so much, cause it gives the world this weird softness sitting right next to all the violence. It reminds you that Ghost is not just about action, it's also about all these small moments that make the world feel alive. And if this series loses these moments, it loses a huge part of its soul. And a lot of Atsu's personality come through the same way. Not through some massive speech or through some giant emotional monologue, but through the small details. The way an insect lands on her finger when she's standing still, cause she just looks at it with this quiet softness before letting it go. Or the way she interacts with foxes. She showers them with love, with belly rubs and head scratches, and it gives us a rare glimpse into who Atsu truly is outside the ghost narrative and the hunt for the Yotei 6. And in a way it shows us who she would have been if Saito had never come to Esso. Atsu doesn't want to be a vengeful spirit, she doesn't want to be a mercenary. She has a deep love for nature, for animals, for other people, and most importantly her family. So these small moments remind you that beneath all the brutality there's still a gentle soul. And that softness is not just found in Atsu, it's in the world itself. Because Yotei doesn't just look beautiful, it feels physical. It feels like a place with texture, weight, temperature, and life. And the snow is probably the clearest example of that. It's so ridiculously well made. I love the way Atsu just sinks into it while running, the way each step presses down, the crunchy packed snow sound under her feet. All of that makes the cold regions feel really tactile. And that's a huge part of why the world feels so touchable. Not just because the graphics are pretty, but because the surfaces actually feel like they push back. That kind of texture is one of the things people feel even when they're not actively thinking about it. And the nature in general just really does a lot for the game emotionally. Birds taking off, deer moving through the fields, predators lurking in certain areas, wild horses running alongside you when the lighting hits just right. All of that stuff just makes the land feel inhabited by more than just enemies and objectives. And it really changes how you move through it, cause you're not just scanning for combat, you're taking in an ecosystem. And that sensation is exactly why the world sticks with you. And the same goes for the regions. I've previously talked about how distinct they are, but what really matters here is how differently they make you feel. The grasslands feel open and lush, Ishikari Plain feels heavier, like the suffering of that area is just hanging in the air, and you feel it in the small visual details too. The shift from summer to fall, the brown leaves swirling through the air, the darker sky, the dead body hanging by the gate when you first arrive. It tells you instantly that this place has been hurt. And from the second you enter Oshima Coast, you really feel like you've entered a war zone. Bombs and arrows are flying through the air, entire villages are burned down, and everywhere you go you stumble into these large-scale battles between the Matsumai and Saito's men. But I think Teshio Ridge might be the best example of all, cause sometimes it feels like this winter paradise where the frozen lakes and the trees almost makes you want to build a snowman and drink hot chocolate. Then the storms roll in and the whole place becomes hell. Visibility drops, the wind starts howling, and Atsu Atsu is literally freezing to death, and suddenly exploration feels like it has stakes. What if you can't find shelter? What if a fight breaks out while your health is already being chipped away by the frost? And that's exactly what makes this region so memorable. It's not just really pretty, it actually changes the way you explore. And then you get to some of the giant dramatic moments like the lightning strikes during one of the wolf missions. They come crashing down so hard that the whole environment starts feeling unstable. The surroundings catch fire and suddenly it feels like nature itself is being dragged into the conflict. But the wolf missions also work on a much smaller level, because you're not only incentivized to complete them to advance the skill tree, but also to strengthen the bond between Atsu and the wolf. As you complete these missions, the wolf will physically come closer and closer to Atsu over time until she's finally able to hand-feed it. That's such a neat detail, because it makes the bond feel like an actual relationship growing instead of just another skill tree filling up. I especially love when their relationship gets to the point where Atsu will try to communicate with it through a shamisen. Atsu sits down in front of the wolf, and as she plays the new song, the wolf joins in with the towels. And on top of that, I think it's so cool that Atsu can call the wolf to her side by playing the song instead of summoning it through the menu. That's such a huge upgrade from Tsushima, where you had to go through the menu every time you wanted to change the song you wanted to play. Because now you're not being pulled out of the immersion, the game is responding directly to Atsu's actions. And even tiny sensory choices like the controller speaker being used for string sounds matter. It's really a small thing, but it makes the sound feel like it's almost 3D. Like parts of the sound comes out of the TV, while the sound of the strings comes out of your hands. And Yotei is full of those tiny sensory details when it's firing on all cylinders. And that doesn't just apply to the sound design, it applies to movement as well. Because even though traversal in Yotei is not always consistent, there are certain moments where the game suddenly remembers how good it can feel just to move through its world. And the best example of that is shrine platforming. It's one of the few places where movement becomes genuinely therapeutic. Jumping from branch to branch, using the grapple hook to pull yourself to new ledges, sliding down loose gravel before taking a leap of faith, throwing out your grapple hook and just praying you catch the rope line before falling to your death. And all of this happens while you move through some of the most scenic spaces I've ever seen in a video game. It all feels so smooth and meditative that I always went out of my way to complete the shrine climbs. And when climbing is done this well, the shrine activities are suddenly way less about getting the charm and more about the climb itself. And that's what I kept coming back to while playing through the game. Yotei is at its absolute best when the systems stop feeling like checklists and start creating actual emotion. Sometimes that emotion is curiosity, sometimes it's that weird meditative calm of moving through the world, and sometimes it's just pure fucking dread, which brings me to one of the coolest ideas in the whole game, Saito's Black Guard. These guys are leagues above the enemies you normally fight. Their parries are unlocked, their attacks are relentless, and especially early on when you don't have the wolf fighting by your side and before you've unlocked all of your spirit attacks and tools, these encounters can feel like straight up death sentences. And I just love the sound of their drums when they're nearby. They're so loud and overwhelming that it's almost impossible to tell where they're coming from. It's like they override the entire soundscape. But the coolest thing about the Blackguard is what happens when they defeat you. Because instead of giving you a game over, they capture you, drag you back to their camp, and suddenly failure is turned into an opportunity for revenge. That's such a sick idea. The first time it happened, I was genuinely shocked. I fully expected the usual reload screen with Atsu spawning somewhere else like nothing had happened. But instead I woke up tied to a post with two of the bosses just chilling at a campfire in front of me. So naturally, I wiggled out of the ropes, sneaked up behind them and stabbed them through the chest. And that felt like such a nice way to get back at them. But what makes them even cooler is that they don't always just spawn out in the wild. Sometimes when you fast travel to an inn, they've already showed up and started searching the place, asking the guests about you. So a place that normally feels like a safe haven suddenly turns into an intense fight against some of Esso's most formidable enemies. And that's exactly what I mean when I say Yotei can sometimes turn a system into an actual feeling. Because the Blackguard are not just stronger enemies. In these moments, they make you genuinely feel hunted. Even something as small as the end suffering mechanic is cool as hell, because after you fought off a swarm of cocky enemies who were taunting you, fighting dirty, setting up tripwires, firing arrows, and attacking from every angle, the power dynamic completely changes. Now the ones who are still breathing are left squirming on the ground. And in that moment you really get that who's tough now feeling, because you get to decide whether Atsu gives them a quick death or just leaves them there to bleed out. And for a character who's basically treated like an Onryo, that feels completely right. It gives the combat this extra little edge of cruelty, restraint and revenge, where even after the fight is technically over, Atsu still gets the final say. And that's where the unreal fantasy really starts to click. Cause Yotei is not just saying that people are scared of Atsu, it gives you these little moments where you understand why they would be. Sometimes that comes from something small like deciding whether an enemy gets mercy or gets left behind, but the strongest version of this whole idea is when Yotei makes you feel like Atsu is not just good in combat, but like she has already become some terrifying legend in motion, chopping off a camp leader's head in one swing, using Unreal's howl, and especially hitting the ghost dance later on. The screen goes black and white, enemies start cowering in fear, time slows, every strike splashes the whole screen in red, and suddenly it doesn't just feel like you're winning a fight, it feels like the game is letting you become the exact myth people are terrified of. You really feel like Atsu has crossed over to something supernatural, like an actual Onryo. And that feeling doesn't just come from going loud, because part of selling Atsu as this terrifying Onryo is making it feel like she controls the encounter. Sometimes that does mean cutting through everyone in front of her, but other times it means vanishing back into the shadows before the rest of the camp even knows what happened. That's why there's one aspect of stealth in Yotei I really appreciate. As I've mentioned in previous videos, stealth can be all over the place, but what I really love is that one part of the camp noticing you doesn't automatically alert the entire place. Because that doesn't just make stealth less punishing when you get caught, it also means you're free to alternate between stealth and combat. You can storm one side of the camp, turn it into a full-on brawl where you cut through everyone in that section, but you can then step back into the shadows, reposition, climb up somewhere higher, and quietly pick apart the rest. So instead of forcing you to commit to one approach, the camp lets your playstyle shift naturally. And that freedom is also why I never got tired of aerial assassinations even after more than 60 hours with the game, because they're one of those small mechanics that don't just feel cool, but also make stealth feel so much more fluid. As long as you hit your target, you completely circumvent fall damage. So you can climb a watchtower, spot an enemy walking 15 meters below you, jump off and assassinate them in one clean strike and disappear before anyone even knows you were there. And what makes it even cooler is that you don't always need the perfect angle before you jump. Even if the assassination prompt doesn't appear while you're standing above them, you can still leap off anyway, line the enemy up mid-air and trigger the strike on the way down. That alone makes the whole system feels so much more fluid and cinematic, and that's where Yotei is at its best, when it takes something familiar and gives it just enough style, freedom, or atmosphere to make it truly feel special. And I think the same thing applies to the Mythic Tales, because those quests are where Yotei gets to step outside the normal rhythm of camps, duels, and open world objectives. They really let the game become more stranger and superstitious, and when they work they give Yotei a much stronger identity. And I love that Yotei lets itself get weird and mythic without ever becoming goofy or immersion breaking, because that's a really hard line to walk. But when it works, it makes Yotei feel like a world where stories, superstitions, and violence all bleed together in a believable way. And the clearest example of that for me is the Legend of the Optionopori, because that quest is honestly so cool. It starts at Huskokotan, where a storyteller tells you about a man named Oki Kurumi who once fired an arrow with enough force to pierce straight through a mountain. And according to the legend, that arrow landed on the other side in the land of bad spirits, the kind of place where everyone who has tried to recover it has never returned alive. And that setup gives the whole quest a completely different atmosphere from what you're normally doing in the game. This is not just another camp or duel, it feels like you're stepping into a story that people have been afraid of for generations. Then when Atsu starts looking for the arrow in the mountains, she runs into this mysterious man who warns her that if she keeps searching for it, the bad spirits will come for her. And that's exactly where the quest starts to shift. Suddenly Yotei stops being this power fantasy where you can cut through almost anything in front of you. Because here your weapons don't work. You can't just simply pull out the katana and solve the problem the way you usually would. Instead, the game turns into this tense survival stealth sequence where a bad spirit taking the form of a bear is actively hunting you through the mountain. And that really changes the feeling, because now you're not just sneaking around because stealth is the optimal choice. You're sneaking because it's the only choice. You're defenseless, you're moving through tall grass, trying to stay low, trying not to draw its attention, listening for where it is, and waiting for the right moment to move. And when it spots you, the whole thing turns into straight up panic. You're not thinking about perfect parries, stand switching, or which tool to use. You're just sprinting, trying to reach the next grapple point before the bear catches up. And that's such a different kind of tension from the rest of the game, because here you're not trying to outfight something, you're trying to survive it. And that's exactly why the quest has just been lingering in my head ever since, because it reminds us of what Yotei can be when it leans into his stranger side. It proves that the game doesn't always need another duel or another group of enemies. Sometimes all it needs is a myth, a mountain, and the feeling that something much stronger than you is coming through the grass. the painted storytelling sequences also help so much with setting up the mythic tales. Cause when somebody starts telling one of these stories, the game shifts into these incredible stylized visuals. And that makes the whole thing feel more like a movie scene from Kung Fu Panda than just NPC dialogue in a game.
To prevent a battle, Oki Kurumi proposed to settle things with a contest of the bow. He crafted a single arrow out of mugwort and shot it past the river with magnificent force. It pierced through the mountain, leaving a giant hole in its wake.
And that's really cool because it gives the myths actual weight. It feels like these tales have been passed down from generation to generation, like they existed long before Atsu ever heard of them. And that's what the mythic tales do best. They make the world feel like it has its own memory, like the past hasn't been preserved perfectly, but carried through stories that have been retold, reshaped, and half forgotten over time. And the Stormblade might be the clearest example of that. And if you played Tsushima, this quest hits in a completely different way, because it doesn't just throw Jin's name out there for cheap fan service. It lets you slowly realize what you're walking into. You hear about a powerful sword lost somewhere along the Oshima coast, a blade tied to an old ghost story. Then you reach the Forgotten Shrine. You follow this grey fox through hidden paths, through cracks in the rock, past places that feel deliberately tucked away from the rest of the world. And the deeper you go, the more the quest starts feeling less like you're chasing a weapon and more like you're uncovering a memory. You find this secluded den, this quiet little place hidden away from everything. And suddenly you start connecting the dots, cause the house is full of small details. The old tools, the traces of a life lived in exile, the sense that someone came here to disappear. Not because they were forgotten, but because disappearing was the only way forward. And that's what makes the Jin connection land for me, cause it's done very subtly and reverently. You see hints of the life he may have had after Tsushima, the idea that he fled to Esso, the suggestion that he may have trained others and helped create the path of the shinobi. And once you get to the home of the first shinobi, the hints get truly interesting. Because when you first find Yuna's dagger, it seems like such a small callback, like Yuna simply gave it to Jin so he had something to remember it by. But then you notice the children's drawings right above it, and suddenly the whole place starts feeling less like a shrine to Jin and more like the remains of a real home. Maybe Yuna did in fact find Jin after Tsushima. Maybe they built a life together, had children, and spent their final years in this beautiful, secluded place far away from everything he had lost. Or maybe he found and raised an orphan and taught him the way of the shinobi, cause even though the haiku you find suggests that Jin was alone in Esso, it still seems impossible that he didn't at least have somebody in his life. Because if he really lived alone all the way out there, then who buried him? Who placed the ghost mask on his grave? That had to be someone who knew him well enough to understand what that symbol meant. And I think that's really awesome, cause it means Jin didn't just vanish into nothing. He had someone in Esso, someone who knew him, remembered him, and cared enough to bury him. And that's exactly why this quest feels so respectful. It gives you closure without taking away the mystery. It lets Jin stay legendary. It lets part of his life remain private. And then it turns that legacy into something Atsu can physically inherit. You claim the Stormblade, the Nine-Tails steal it, you chase them down, and by the time you reach the fight with the Nine-Tailed Thief, the quest has stopped being just about finding a sword. It has become a passing of the torch, because the thief is not just a random enemy holding Jin's weapon. He fights like the memory of the first game is being thrown right back at you. The stances, the movement, the dirty tricks, that feeling of suddenly being on the receiving end of the exact kind of bullshit you used to terrorize enemies with as Jin. And after that, when Atsu finally earns the Stormblade and unlocks Dance of Wrath, it really does feel like one ghost story is fading into another's. It gives the series a sense of continuity that I really hope they keep building on in the next game. And that's the thing Yotei does so surprisingly well when the story is at its best. It lets the past come back in ways that actually change how you see the present. Sometimes that's through myth or legacy, and sometimes it's through a reveal that catches you completely off guard.
Atsu. It's me. You don't recognize your own brother.
As I've talked about in previous videos, I have my issues with the story. But there are absolutely moments where Yotei catches you off guard in a really good way. The Jubei reveal is a great example. Finding out that the Matsumai soldier catching Atsu trying to cross the border is actually her twin brother works so well. Not just because it comes as a surprise, but because it instantly tells you just how far apart they really are. Jubei grew up inside structure, loyalty, duty, and the samurai code, while Atsu grew up alone, consumed by vengeance, with nothing to anchor her except the need to hunt down the people who took everything from her. So the reveal doesn't just shock you, you start wondering just how different Atsu's life would have been if they hadn't been separated all those years back. Would Atsu have joined Clan Matsumai, or would Jubei have joined Atsu's quest for revenge? That was a question that kept lingering in my head as I played through the game. And the reveal about the Kitsune's true identity was amazing as well, cause I really didn't see it coming at all. I thought Oyuki was just a musician who had learned how to survive under Lord Saito's occupation. So when I got to the boss fight against the new Kitsune, the reveal really started messing with my head. Especially because he's using poison on Atsu. She passes out and suddenly the game starts showing you these images of the Night of the Burning Tree. You see the Kitsune there, not just as another member of the Yotei 6, but seemingly trying to protect Atsu, trying to help her escape. And that's where the reveal becomes so good, because your head starts spinning. Is any of this real? Is this what actually happened? Was the Kitsune trying to save her that night? Or is this just the poison twisting Atsu's memory? And then the whole thing clicks, because Atsu realizes that Oyuki isn't just Oyuki. She is in fact the original Kitsune. The same Kitsune who was there 16 years ago on the Night of the Burning Tree. The same person Atsu has spent almost her entire life associating with the people who destroyed her family. And that's why the reveal hits. Because it's not just a generic twist, it genuinely makes you reevaluate everything. Is Oyuki helping Atsu all these years later because she feels guilty? Is she actually evil and planning on betraying Atsu later on? Or is all of this just the Kitsune trying to get Atsu to distrust Oyuki? That confusion is exactly why I believe this mission is the pinnacle of Yotei's storyline, because for a moment it stopped feeling safe and predictable. I was visibly surprised and I found myself physically leaning forward in my seat.
You never asked why I was after the Kitsune. Because you were there.
I tried to save you.
And my mother? What did you do for her?
That's the version of Yotei I keep coming back to. Not the version where the game is just checking off open world objectives, but the version where a small detail, a side activity, a strange myth, or a sudden story reveal makes the whole world feel deeper and more profound than at first glance. So I think the reason why Ghost of Yotei keeps lingering in my head is that it makes even small moments feel like they belong to something larger. And I don't mean in scale, but in the way the world feels when you move through it. Because even when you're just riding toward an objective, following a lead, finishing some side activity or clearing out enemies, Yotei has this way of making it all feel strangely atmospheric and alive. They found a balance that really shouldn't work as well as it does. Cause Yotei can feel like a hellscape one second and paradise the next. You ride past burned down villages, get ambushed on the road and feel the violence hanging over the land. But then you ride through the most beautiful flower fields, stop by a peaceful lake, and the whole world suddenly feels like heaven on earth. But Yotei doesn't just keep shifting visually, it also shifts emotionally. Sometimes it feels really lonely when you're riding through the barren wasteland, coming across nothing but enemies and sitting at a campfire by yourself in the middle of nowhere. But then a familiar face shows up at camp and starts commenting on your cooking skills. Or you ride into a village full of vendors, locals drinking and people playing senihachiki. Or you get to spend the day with Kiku, Jubei and Oyuki collecting mushrooms, and suddenly it doesn't feel lonely anymore. The world starts feeling inhabited again, like there are still people in it worth knowing, moments worth sharing, and bits of warmth still left between all the violence. And that constant swing between peace and danger is exactly why Yotei has lingered in my head ever since I put the controller down. So no matter where Sucker Punch takes this series next, they have to hold on to that feeling.
I topped them off with water so you wouldn't notice.
You have to be impressed. At her age, we just buried the bottle.
But now it's time for us to discuss. What do you think makes Yotei special, and what is the one thing you don't want the next game to lose? And if you want the full picture, I've also made the other two sides of the whole Yotei discussion. One about whether Ghost of Yotei is actually enough of a sequel, and one about what Yotei needs to fix to become a masterpiece. So if you want the full trilogy, click the video on screen and keep it going. Critically, out.